What's up everybody, we're back with another raid guide, and today we're taking a look at Sire Denathrius on Mythic difficulty. I'll be going over most of the mechanics, how to deal with them, and our overall tactic for this fight. So for this encounter you want 2 tanks, 4 healers, and 14 DPS. Setup wise, the only mandatory thing is at least 1 warlock for gateways, and 1 druid for roar. Druid can be skipped, but it makes phase 1 a bit harder without one. But other than that, you just want really big blasters. There's a lot of cleave in this encounter as well as a tight single target burn in the last phase. So you don't want to put all your eggs in the AoE basket, even though padding is fun. You still want to be able to pump in last phase. Now with that out of the way, let's go over what's new on Mythic. A lot actually. So let's start with phase 1. On Mythic, you'll start the encounter with 6 stacks of Burden of Sin instead of 5, meaning you'll have to do the Cleansing Pain soaks a bit differently. On top of this, a new mechanic has been added to Cleansing Pain called Collective Trauma. Players hit by Cleansing Pain deals damage to anyone within 1 yard of them, and removes 1 extra stack from players hit by that AoE pulse, and you spawn 1 extra Echo of Sin add. So you can't just YOLO stack for the Cleansing Pains anymore. However, you can use this in a controlled manner to remove extra stacks or remove stacks faster, which I will go over a bit later. Following this, if the adds that spawns from Cleansing Pain isn't killed within 14 seconds, they return to the player that spawned them, and so does the Burden of Sin stacks. Lastly, you also have to deal with 1 more Night Hunter, so you'll have 3 beams to soak instead of 2. So properly soaking them becomes a tad more difficult since you don't want to double soak unless you're a tank, and you'll need like 3-4 players per beam to make sure they don't flop over. Moving on to phase 2. The big new thing in phase 2 is the Night Cloak. At the start of phase 2, 4 big adds will spawn, 1 per platform around the phase 2 area. These adds can't be moved and does not need to be tanked. They all have their own ability as well as one they share. The shared ability is Nathria Hymn, which each ad channels until they're dead. Anyone within 50 yards of an ad takes around 2k shadow damage every 2 sec and gets a debuff that increases damage taken from that ad by 20%, which stacks, and it lasts for 60 seconds. And this is on a ad per ad basis. They all channel it, but getting stacks from Sinsear does not increase damage taken from Gloomveil, etc, etc. And like I said, on top of this, they all have their own ability as well. Sinsear casts Searing Censer every 5 seconds, sending out red projectiles in every direction. If you get hit by one of these, you get silenced for 6 seconds and take a ton of damage. Evershade at 66% and 33% he will spawn a Baleful Shadow. This ad casts Vengeful Wail, which deals around 20k raid-wide damage and interrupts casts for 4 seconds, and you need to interrupt this ad 5 times to make it despawn. Duskhollow has the Hollow Grasp. Whenever a player within 25 yard hits duskhollow with an attack, they get grip to him. Very nice. And Gloomveil uses Gloomveil, which is pretty much a smoke bomb. Players cannot target in or out of the anime cloud that surrounds him. Other than that, all other mechanics works the same, but this does change phase 2 completely. And last phase, you will now get Blood Price in phase 3. But since there's no longer any Burden of Sin stacks, everyone will be at the same height for this, and you instantly die. Wah, wah. But this is where the hidden mechanic through the mirror comes into play. When phase 3 starts, if you go through a mirror, you will be placed in the mirror realm, if you will. Players in this realm cannot target players outside of it and vice versa. On top of this, if a player runs into a player of the opposite realm, they both instantly die. And on top of that, all the knockbacks are reversed for players in the mirror realm. So during the Shattering Pain knockback and Blood Price, mirror peeps get dragged through the boss and away, whereas non-mirror peeps just get knocked away from boss. And on top of that, players in the mirror realm are the only ones that can soak the opposite realm's seeds and vice versa. However, being in the opposite realm means you're not affected by the other realm's Blood Price, so yeah, you get to live. But I'll go over phase 3 a lot more later. With that said, let's go over the fight starting with phase 1. Let's talk soaks, like me soaking up viewers on Twitch? With the strat we're using, the goal is to get everyone down to 3 stacks before intermission starts, and to be able to make it with 3 stacks we used a druid roar as soon as intermission triggers, which means 1 druid will need to be at 0 stacks before intermission so they can roar when they get gripped up in the air. Now there's a ton of ways to do the phase 1 soaks. In order to accomplish this, most guilds do a very big soak for the very first cleansing price, since everyone has their DPS cooldowns up at that point. So you want to split your raid into 3 groups. One group is the Cheesy group with DKs and Shamans, since they don't need to lose any stacks at all, and the rest evenly split into 2 groups that alternate on every cleansing pane. You also want to assign a few players to stack in the first and third cleansing pane, so they trigger the collective trauma to lose more stacks. So you offset the blood price even more, and so your druid can get to 0 stacks. So for the first cleansing pane, we had 6 players stacking in groups of 3 to instantly get down to 3 stacks. Following that, we had our druid stack with another player for the third one to lose 2 extra stacks, and then no more stacking for the rest of the cleansing panes, unless a player missed a soak for whatever reason. Then they usually stacked with a tank or another player just to get back on track. But like I said, there's a lot of ways to do these soakings. Some guilds lose even more stacks on the first cleansing, but this worked out for us and it seemed very consistent and it didn't make blood price any scarier. Next thing I want to talk about is the Night Hunter soak. Like I mentioned earlier, there's now 3 of them that needs to be soaked. The easiest way to do this is to have players targeted by it make their beam as long as possible, and to the best of their ability, make the beams cross over each other close to or on top of the boss. Doing so means both tanks can easily triple soak them, and melee can easily split up between the 3 beams next to the boss. Having the beams not cross over means there's a greater chance of one beam not being soaked properly. And you also want to avoid having 2 beams run alongside each other parallel, because their damage range is larger than the animation, so you risk soaking 2 beams. Now the DPS requirement for phase 1 is pretty much non-existent, and most guilds have to stop DPS to not transition too fast, so really just focus on doing beams properly. And if you're targeted by the Night Hunter and you can immune it, move into your ad or close to it to avoid people accidentally soaking your beam when it's not needed. Other than that, pop all DPS cooldowns on pull, but save 2 and 3 minute cooldowns when they come back up again. If you for some reason lack DPS to push boss into intermission, you can use 2-minute cooldowns again when they're back up, but I really doubt you'll need to. And if you do it just because, hey, pad, well then you're gonna have to AFK more to avoid transitioning early, so Lastly, use personal defensives on the first blood price, as it can be pretty spicy. And that's pretty much it for this. Otherwise the movement is just like heroic. You want to transition after you've killed the last set of ads spawned by the last cleansing price before the final Ravager, so they don't fly back into players and return their burden stacks. You'll get your last set of Night Hunters following that cleansing pane, but it's fine to transition during it. However, if possible, you don't want to transition right after soaking the Night Hunters, because you don't want to go into the intermission with low HP. And if you want to min-max, you can transition during the last Ravager cast and you'll get 2 free seconds of extra DPS that way, which means a little less damage needed in phase 2. Now as soon as you transition and get gripped into the air, you want your druid to roar to give everyone the movement buff. And then the fun starts, phase 2. Long rant will be long. Now for phase 2, there's a few different ways you can do this. Like I mentioned earlier, you will have 1 big ad on each of the platforms that you need to kill. Some guilds do 2+1+1, meaning you kill 2 big ads at the same time, then 1 and then 1. Doing so can give you more boss DPS since you're not splitting the raid as much, but it makes some of the mechanics a lot harder to deal with, like the Massacre. Or you can do 2+2, which is what we used for our first kill. We started with 2+1+1 and got to phase 3 with it, but swapped to 2+2 later on, which made it easier for us to get there consistently. So this will be from the 2+2 point of view. For this, you will split your raid into 2 groups for each set of ads that you kill. For the first set, you'll be killing Sinsear and Evershade. The goal is to get both of them down before Sire casts Hand of Destruction. We had 6 ranged DPS plus 2 healers on Sinsear and the rest of the raid on Evershade. This includes the 2 tanks. The tricky part here is splitting up your DPS cooldowns. You need just enough to kill them before the hand, but you don't want to overshoot this because then you probably won't have enough DPS for the next set of ads. So we had most of our ranged DPS pop cooldowns on Sinsear except mages, and most of our melee DPS held their DPS cooldown and used their first combat pot on Evershade. But this will change depending on your setup as well as overall damage. Now for the second set of ads, you'll be splitting up the raid again. This time time we had 7 ranged DPS plus 2 healers on Gloomveil and the rest on duskhollow. Mages hard carried the Gloomveil ad here, and anyone that had DPS cooldowns in the duskhollow group used that on him. Now with that out of the way, let's break down phase 2. Now first of all, tanks, make sure to swap after every racking pain, so old Sire tank takes Remornia and vice versa. Remornia's bleed is nasty, just saying, and the overall tank damage is pretty insane. It's a big step up from the rest of the bosses. For the impales, I recommend a weakaura that I will link in the description. You want to position impales in front of the sides of whichever mirror you're at when they go out, and this weakaura pops up, shows you which position you should take, and makes impales a lot easier. Phase 2, let's break it down! Cue the picture! As you can see here, it is very self-explanatory. As soon as you transition into phase 2, you want one warlock to place a gateway going from the northeast part of the main platform over to Evershade so melee can get there. Your Sinsear group should move towards the northwest platform and start nuking her ASAP. You don't need to go over to this platform, but do make sure to not get hit by the red projectile she shoots out. It is actually a DPS loss to get hit. Think of the pad! Have your tanks pick up both Sire and Remornia and move over to Evershade. And make sure to hit Evershade with Sire's racking pain. At 66 and 33%, Evershade will spawn an ad, and these needs to be interrupted. So you will need an interrupt rotation for both of these ads. 5 interrupts per ad. And they can be interrupted fast, because as soon as you've interrupted an ad 5 times, it despawns. Now one of your tanks will need to move Sire to the eastern mirror before his second racking pain, as you need to hit Gloomveil with this one, to make sure you have enough damage to kill it with this strat. And you will need a new gateway going from the eastern mirror's ledge over to Gloomveil so range can get over there following the Hand of Destruction. You want to kill Sinsear and Evershade a few seconds before the hand if possible to avoid getting the knocky-backy swirly spawns as you're getting gripped. Following this, you can do things a few ways. You can either have everyone in the Gloomveil group use the gateway right after the hand to get to Gloomveil, keep running towards the back of the platform to get as much space between you and the hand's AoE as possible, and some healing cooldowns to survive it. Or like we did, since we had 3 mages, we had everyone except mages go through the mirror after the hand, and mages gateway to Gloom and ice block the hand's AoE, and they sat in ice block if they got targeted by impale. So let's go through those steps. Following the first hand, mages went to Gloomveil, everyone else went through the mirror. As soon as the hand's AoE was done, the rest of the Gloomveil group went back through the mirror and gatewayed over to Gloomveil. The duskhollow group went straight to duskhollow, and you just need to smack him once to get gripped over. Boss and Remornia goes over to duskhollow, and you need to hit him with the racking pain as well. If a player is targeted by impale, they should deal with it near the mirror before going over to either Gloomveil or duskhollow. During these 2 ads, you will get a Massacre. And honestly, best tip I can give is don't be greedy. If you get hit, you will die. Don't be greedy. Goal here is, again, kill him before the second Hand of Destruction. Ideally, a few seconds before to avoid these swirls during grip. And you need to position Sire at the south mirror a few seconds before this hand. Get gripped, run through mirror, and now it's time to smack Cabalists. Position boss on one of the ledges behind one of the Cabalists and make sure to hit both of them with the next racking pain. Then move boss and Remornia between the ads so players can cleave. You have a lot of time to finish this set of Cabalists, so prio DPS on Sire or Remornia and just cleave them down. You will get a new Massacre during this, so be careful when the ads die since you get the swirlies during it. If you're having issues dodging Massacre with swirls, you can kill the Cabalists a bit faster, but that didn't seem necessary to us. Following the Massacre, Hand of Destruction, go through mirror and start smacking next set of Cabalists. These needs to die a lot faster than the previous set, as you want to kill 2 sets of Cabalists before the next hand if possible. You will need to move boss and Remornia up towards the eastern mirror before the next racking pain, so you debuff these 2 Cabalists as well. And the entire raid should run over to this Cabalist like 2-3 seconds after the tank hops away. It's fine if the previous set of ads die to dots while you run over, but they do need to die. Now when you're at the eastern mirror's Cabalists, make sure they're debuffed and try and kill them a few seconds before beforehand to avoid swirlies when you get grip. If you can't kill them in time and you keep getting fudged by the swirlies, it's okay to leave 1 or 2 of them on low health, as you will be returning to this side following the next hand, and you can finish them off then instead. Following the hand, run through mirror, deal with the 4th set of Cabalists. For this set, you'll have a lot of time again to deal with them, so prior damage on Sire. Following this hand, back through mirror, finish off the old Cabalists if they're still alive, and then hard tunnel on Sire to get him as low as possible before phase 3. You have about 8 to 10 seconds before phase 3 starts when you get through this mirror, and phase 3 will trigger either based on that time or if you get Sire to 40.5% HP, which is what you want. If you trigger phase 3 by getting Sire to 40.5% instead of timer, you'll be far better off in phase 3. But you don't want to hit 40.5% HP too soon either, like 1-2 seconds before phase 3 timer, otherwise timers in phase 3 can get a bit scuffed. And with that said, phase 3 time! This phase is all about boss and raid movement, so I will go over all of this step by step. But before we start, let's reiterate the raid splits. Like I mentioned at the start, you will need to split the raid into 2 even groups, one melee group and one ranged group. Melee group will go through the mirror into the mirror realm at the start of phase 3, and you want to put both tanks, all melee and melee based healers like holy paladins in this group, and fill out with ranged if needed to get the even split. We used a mage as filler here for our kill. All of our movement is based off the marks we have up as seen in this picture, so I urge you to use the same if you follow this strat. On top of this, we're using 2 weakauras for this phase, one for the melee group and one for the ranged group that pops up a bit before seeds, telling you which mark to drop them on. This is based off ways on Wago's weakaura that we changed to match our marks. We'll link the 2 we used as well as the original weakaura made by Waze. Now with that out of the way, let's break down the last phase. As soon as you transition into phase 3, melee group runs back through the mirror to get into the mirror realm. Ranged runs straight to the middle and stops roughly around where we have our purple mark. Melee should be behind boss, slightly to the side to avoid getting knocked through the boss into one of the ranged players, since mirror realm knockbacks are reversed. For tanks, we pretty much tank swap during every Shattering Pain. You will get Shattering Pain and a few seconds after your very first Blood Price. Blood Price smacks hard as hell here, so have everyone use personal defensive cooldowns for this Blood Price. After the Blood Price, you get your first seeds. Range move to the red mark and place your seeds as close together as possible without clipping each other, and melee place your seed or seeds on top of the blue mark, and then you rotate left. So melee group moves to soak seeds on red, range group soak seeds on blue mark. If there's 2 seeds up for melee to soak, always position boss between them so melee can hit boss regardless of which seed they soak. And you need to soak all seeds before Sire's next shattering. Range, make sure to not get knocked off the platform, and melee use this knockback to get back to the middle. A few seconds after this Shattering Pain, you'll get your second set of seeds. Range, place seeds on green mark, melee on star, then rotate left. Soak these before Shattering Pain. Range, get back to star after knockback. Melee a bit in front of star but slightly to the side. You're back between star and orange mark. And this is to bait Ravager and Massacre. Wait for the first Massacre line to spawn. Then range seed goes to green mark again and try and place them close together. If you have to choose between closer to the middle or far back, go for closer to the middle to make it easier for melee to soak them. Range players that are not targeted by seed should dodge Massacre towards blue mark, then move close to the no-no area that the Ravager spawned and move alongside it up to orange marks to soak melee seed. For the melee group, as soon as the first Massacre line spawn, seed player moves to orange and rest of melee dodges Massacre around purple mark and then move over to green to soak. This is followed by a shattering knockback into your second Blood Price, and this is a nasty overlap, as you'll be taking a ton of damage when you soak the seeds, then from Shattering Pain, and again a massive chunk from Blood Price. So if possible, use things like Anti-Magic Zone and Darkness in melee melee when you soak the seeds and shattering, and have everyone use healthstone and or health pot before the blood price to make sure you survive it. Keep in mind that most on-ground CDs like Spirit Link, Barrier, etc. does not work for blood price since you fly up above them, so you need to use things like Aura Mastery or Spirit Shell for these, as well as being as topped as possible. Now following this blood price, range drop seed on orange and melee drops on purple mark, then rotate left. Soak seeds and wait for the knocky knock. Range group gather around green mark following this knockback and melee in front of blue mark close to the middle. And wait for the super fun overlap, Ravager, Massacre and knockback during it. You want a gateway going from green mark to a bit in front of red mark that range will use, and melee, have fun. Wait for the first Massacre line, then every range click the gateway, and a few seconds after you'll get a shattering pain, which is during the Massacre. Any player that can immune should immune this except mages that are in range group, as they can use theirs to extend the enrage in the end a bit. DKs can use Death's Advance to avoid knockback, you can use Bop on players in melee group if they can't safely deal with it themselves, and yeah, just anything that makes you survive this or makes you immune to the knockback or damage from Massacre. Range generally have it a bit easier since they gateway away from Massacre towards orange mark where there's usually a lot of free space, so it's easier to position yourself to be safe when you get knocked. And range get knocked away from boss, whereas melee gets dragged into the boss, which has the highest density of Massacre lines as well as the no-no Ravager area. Oh, and shamans, they have Ankh. Now, to add insult to injury, as soon as the knockback is done, you get seeds. Range seeds around orange mark along the Ravager area, melee seed on red mark. Following this soak, you'll get a new knockback into blood price. Everyone should use personal defensives for this blood price as they should be back again. After the blood price, you get your final set of seeds that you soak. Range drop seeds on red mark, melee smack in the middle next to the Ravager zone, then rotate left. Following this soak, you get a knockback into new seeds. These seeds you do not soak. Range seed go into the Ravager zone if they won't die from it, otherwise just far back. Melee seed a bit behind melee so you don't AoE anyone, and at this point just nuke, nuke, nuke. You need to beat the last Ravager spawn, which is the hard enrage if you will. Mages can ice block this Ravager smack to extend the enrage a bit. Non-immunes that wanna try and survive a second or two longer can move into the old Ravager zone just before the new one spawns, like a second before, because the new zone pretty much one-shots you as it spawns, and the old one will give you a second or two more. Now keep in mind there's very little space for the final burn, and you probably will get Massacre lines during it, so deep breaths. Make sure you know where melee group and range group is, you don't dance into each other, and deep breaths again. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Long rant always gets so long on end bosses. Now, if you have any questions at all, make sure to hit me up in the comments or become a patron and get access to the Stankie Discord, where you can find raid WEAKAURAS, help with healing notes, and pretty much anything progression related. Huge shout out to all my patrons and peeps in the Stankie Discord for all of your support, and a huge shout out to Broccolis for all your help with the Stankie Discord. And of course to the Loot for the Win peeps for all your POVs over the tier. Now don't forget the usual stuff like subscribe and ring that notification bell. I'm also streaming all of our progression and farm raids on Twitch, so make sure to check that out. Mondays and Tuesdays. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. And if you ever see a warlock called Cikra, he's pretty cool.